Welcome to CurveBall DFI-ed. Currently not sponsored by anybody, but soon we will be. I'm your host, David Ayofi, and on our first podcast, we have the pleasure of having Clara Tarantul. She's a successful businesswoman who's in charge of running the largest dialysis center in the Northeast. Clara has an amazing journey, starting as an immigrant from Odessa, going to Colorado, and then ultimately ending in New York City. In today's podcast, we will learn how she became successful in the medical industry and what factors contributed to her success. Welcome, Clara. Thank you so much for coming today. Is there anything in our background that we had for you that we missed or that you want to kind of go over?
No, that's pretty accurate. Thank you for having me. Just to let you know, I did come as an immigrant from Odessa, but we came in 1978, 79. So I was about 7 or 8 years old. And I don't really remember too much of Odessa, though I've had an opportunity to go visit several times. And Denver, Colorado, I loved growing up there. That definitely helped to shape me and create a little bit of my personality and who I am. I still have friends from Denver that I'm still friends with today that I met in first grade. And they too are successful individuals. One is an attorney for ESPN and ABC and Disney, and she's the head counsel, legal counsel for them. Another one is head of risk for Morgan Stanley. So, we all kind of understood as immigrants that we had to work hard and fight to make something of ourselves. And we pretty much all did. And we still stay in touch.
It's very interesting. That's very interesting. It kind of sounds like even though you guys had this whole background of like immigrants, are these friends that you're talking about, they're from Colorado as well, or they ultimately?
So one of my friends, she's originally from Russia, but we met in Colorado at the yeshiva we all attended, Hillel Academy. And Mila, the attorney that's in LA, she too is from, I don't remember where from Russia. I know Allah is from Kiev. Mila is from another portion of a part of Russia, but we all met, and we were unique in the sense that immigrants were just starting to come into Denver in the late 70s. So we were some of the first immigrants that were coming from Russia, and we were sponsored by the Jewish Center, which helped to take us in and provided us shelter and some furniture and the basic necessities of what we would need to start. And the rest was basically up to us.
Very interesting. So how do you think your career would have folded if you never ended up leaving Denver?
It's hard to say. I never saw myself in dialysis per se. My dream was always law, and I wanted to be an attorney. Probably more than attorney, I wanted to be a judge. I really loved law in itself and its in its content, so I never wanted to be like an attorney where I had an office and dealt with clients. And a lot of the stuff that I studied in high school was pre-law, and I took the LSAT and I was going to go to law school, and then I decided to postpone it and get married, and I was going to go back to law school, and that kind of never happened. So and dialysis kind of came about in a very strange way, because initially I was actually looking to do a nursing home. And at that time, New York State had a program where they were taking over nursing homes that the owners failed to manage properly, that were full of citations and issues. And then the government, the state of New York, would repair and correct all of the deficiencies of the nursing home. And you would go through this program, and upon completion of the program, they would assign you as the administrator of that nursing home. And once the debt was repaid back to the state, you would be able to, as the acting administrator, become owner of the nursing home. And I was planning to do that program. And then just as I was going to start it, they stopped the program because I guess the owners of the nursing homes no longer wanted to lose their nursing homes. So they started correcting their own deficiencies. And just in my further investigating what else would interest me and things like that, I stumbled onto dialysis because in the nursing home setting, there was actually a tremendous need for dialysis for the people that were residents of the nursing home, so they can get dialysis while in a nursing home. And I started looking into it more, and then I decided I was going to go volunteer at Brookdale Hospital just so I can get a taste of what dialysis is about. And I volunteered there for probably a good half a year. So I kind of stopped working and used my free time to just go figure it out. And I did everything from front desk to filing to assisting the nurses, assisting the administrator, and I kind of got to see a little bit of everything. And I really liked it, and I just continued down that path. I was working with a doctor who at that time I decided to share my idea with, and he thought it was a wonderful idea, and he said, I want to invest and do this with you. And I said, okay. And here we are today.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
It sounds like you saw the opportunity and you hopped on it. Right now, there's a lot of opportunities out there with like the whole crypto fiasco thing that's going on. But obviously, some opportunities are more reliable than others. What made you think that this was an opportunity that was going to be relevant in the long term, as opposed to something that was like just there for like a short while?
Well, to be quite honest with you, David, I don't think that this opportunity was there. I think this was an opportunity that literally was developed and created through my ideas and just pushing and just continuing to push and push and push. There wasn't like a dialysis center out there, and you kind of had to figure out all the ends and components of what you would need in order to formulate and get a center open and functioning. Everything from your referrals to your staff to your physicians, your team, everyone involved. So I can't, this wasn't an existing center. This literally was hatched from the very, very beginning. So I remember initially we were looking for attorneys that specialized in doing, you have to submit a request to the Department of Health and to the state of New York to get approval to open up such a center. So it's what they call an Article 13, Title 10. So I found attorneys that specialized in this. I found special consultants that did this. I had to find special accountants that did special cost reports that you have to submit to the state. And you basically start putting it together piece by piece by piece. And that took about 2 years. That went on from 1998 to 2002. And then in March of 2002 was when the state actually came, surveyed the facility, and allowed us to open.
It's pretty interesting. I personally did not know that whole side. You said your childhood dream was to become a lawyer, and you ultimately tried to achieve that goal. And then you took that gap and never ended up going back for it and saw this new business opportunity. Were you able to use any of like the knowledge that you had of law in order to help you start?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was when we moved from Denver to New York, I actually went to Sheepshead Bay High School, and they had a pre-law type of high school major, which I did. And we did a lot of like mock trials and preparing documents and reading different briefs and reading court decisions and things like that. And that was like my first taste to it. And that's when I decided, I just love law in general. I love the beauty of it. I love, in essence, the difficulty and simplicity of it, in the sense that a lot of times it's quite clear. I also like the fact that it's usually very fair and balanced. But then at Brooklyn College, I also majored in political science, and I was a pre-law major. And I worked at the lay advocate office. I volunteered and then actually worked there, providing free legal care and counseling to Brooklyn College students. So things like landlord-tenant issues, small disputes, maybe a traffic ticket. Sometimes it was a disciplinary action on behalf of Brooklyn College, maybe accusing them of cheating or, plagiarizing or something like that. So we would help them. We would sometimes go to hearings with them. We would draft letters for them. And that's really what I wanted to do. And I went as far as I took the LSAT, and I even started to prepare some of my applications to law school, and then I put it on hold and I got married. Instead of going to school in September, I got married in November, and I said I'd give myself a year and I'd come back to it. So if there's any regret in life, it's don't put things you really want on hold. So
why did you ultimately decide not to go back in the year and end up doing this whole business endeavor?
Well, kind of like 1 year became 2 years, and then 2 years became, then Stella came along, and and it just was another excuse. And then by then I was already pretty involved in the development of dialysis. So, but everything that I learned in terms of reading contracts, reading documents, preparing letters, formulating a defense, everything a lot of things I got even just from high school, and the small exposure that I had through the lay advocate office at Brooklyn College. Until today, I'm sure it helps me tremendously.
I mean, yeah, we just started do First Innovation, and there's like a lot of stuff that we have going on, and I didn't even know about it. So we've just added an accountant and an attorney, and they've been saving us a lot of headaches. And I didn't even know that you have to do like terms and conditions, and then there's like all this extra other stuff that it's like if you're this type of corporation versus this type of corporation or that type of LLC, there's like benefits to it, and where you register your office and this and that. So there's like a lot of benefits to that. But one thing that you did mention is that you had a bunch of things going on at the same time. How would you say you were able to manage all these tasks that you had that were going on, especially because you had a kid and family?
Well, it's a balancing act, and then it's a matter of, setting your priorities and what becomes urgent and needs immediately to be addressed, and what can be, what can wait. So, and what you can put on the back burner, so to speak. So, honestly, being a mom and a wife, you learn to do a lot of balancing. So you're juggling many things at the same time, and you learn to be a very good juggler. So occasionally some things fall through, and but for the most part, you're always multitasking.
Sounds like it was definitely one of those like periods of time where you just had a bunch of things going on, and you kind of learned as you were going on and kind of learning from your mistakes. Can you talk about a mistake that you made early on in your career that now looking back, you're like, oh, I would have avoided.
I can tell you that mistakes are usually the best things that you would learn from. When you do something and it and it happens, there's actually little that you learn from that. But it's the mistakes that really teach you the most valuable lesson. And the mistakes could be just, even some business decision that we made. I can't think of one off the top of my head right now. But some business decision you made, or maybe a hire that you did that looked good from the beginning. But maybe somewhere in your gut, you had a feeling about it and you kind of didn't listen. And then you're like, I should have listened. But I tend to find that where you made your mistakes, maybe you rushed through something, didn't fully read a document, didn't think it through, didn't look at all the different angles, is where you learn your most valuable lessons, unfortunately.
Do you think it's more important to learn from your mistakes or just like avoid them altogether?
No, I think that mistakes are not bad. Okay. They could be sometimes expensive. They could delay you in time, but they're definitely very valuable lessons. They're lessons that sometimes you'll never learn in any other way other than by just making that mistake.
If you had the opportunity to give yourself any advice, like your current self back to Colorado, back when you were still young and going up the whole education ladder and pursuing your whole career, what advice would you give yourself?
I'm not sure. I mean, some of the things that I learned very early in life, and this was primarily from my father, was, in terms of dealing with people, being able to really read people. And just sometimes I could look at a person just standing in my doorway and I already, for whatever reason, just know if that's going to work or not. But, he always taught me, things that really bothered him were liars and lazy people. So, laziness was unacceptable and liars was just absolutely a no-no. So, always be honest, speak the truth, take the consequences and move on. But you're still an honest person who, addressed the situation. You were honest about it. You learned from it and you moved on. He would have never tolerated somebody who was either lazy or a liar. He also didn't particularly like people that pretended to be stupid, like I don't know. I guess like some people, they'll do something and they think that they're being very tricky or slick, and you kind of just sometimes sit back and you look at them and say, I'm not sure what you're thinking, but that's not going to work here. So go out, reconsider your position, come back in and talk to me again. So, and I've kind of stuck to those principles my entire life. There was one other thing that a rabbi taught me early on in yeshiva, and he would say, don't do unto others what you would not want done to yourself. So, if you pretty much stick to, I'm going to do to people no more, no less than what I would want to be done to me, it's a good rule to follow. So.
You spoke briefly about some things not to do in business, right? What qualities do you think that, because obviously every single good business has a strong leader. What qualities do you think a strong leader needs to have?
Well, I think probably one of the most valuable things that I learned is don't pretend to know it all. Don't try to look smart or sound smart. Sometimes take a step back and say, you know what, I really need to look into this. I need to think about this. Give yourself the night, give yourself a day or two, maybe call some business acquaintances, get their advice if they've been in that situation, and then make your decision. You don't look smart by making a rash decision and then it being the wrong one. So even if you come to the same conclusion, but it's a day later, it's a day later. Sometimes it's a lot more difficult to repair what you already screwed up by rushing into a decision that was maybe the wrong one.
Often right now, there's like hard deadlines that people are like, okay, you have to get this done by a certain point. How do you instill that value into your workers without being overly aggressive and getting frustrated with them? Because the way to instill certain values in people is not necessarily by yelling at them. But yeah, you also do.
In business, there's never any yelling. Yeah. This is not, you're not reprimanding children here. You're not yelling at anybody. You're not taking a harsh tone. You're not using, harsh words. That doesn't work. If it's like, for example, an employee that continuously is tardy, you have a discussion with them once. You might have another discussion with them. Then you write them up and then you fire them. If it continues, if they still don't learn the lesson. But for the most part, I've come to the point where I meet with people. I'm very picky about who I'll hire in terms of they have to have certain qualities as an employee before I'll bring them on. So then later I don't have to deal with these type of things.
There's like a phrase that is always like around that. You're only as strong as the weakest link. And obviously, because when you start growing a business, you can't manage every single person. How do you see the people that are working for you? How do you see them like organize themselves? Do they like pick a leader themselves, or does the leader like stand out? Like how do they break out into different like groups? Like, do you know what I mean? Like in different tasks?
Well, truth be told, I mean, the only two positions here that would be leading positions would be my medical director, who's still technically my employee, and my nurse manager, who runs the entire treatment floor, who's still my direct employee, and my office manager. And most of the time, they would not take on a project, nor would they sign a contract or make any type of executive type of decision without my input and my okay. So that just doesn't happen. Maybe I'm a little too controlling, but that kind of power I don't relinquish to anyone.
I was talking more of like how there's like 5 secretaries working in a room. And if somebody has a question, instead of asking the boss, most of the time they ask some of the other secretaries. So
I have layers of administrators that those people would report to. So my front desk reports to the office manager, and the nurses and the technicians on the floor, they report to the nurse manager. And then a lot of the other staff, like dietitian, social worker, they also report to the medical director. So a lot of it sometimes gets resolved at those levels, or amongst themselves, or within just who their managers are or direct supervisors. But if it needs to, it comes to me. So, and I always have an open door policy. So I always tell them, don't think a question is stupid. I'd rather you ask me than to make a decision that I would not be happy with. And then we have 2 problems.
Sounds like you have a lot of stuff to deal with. And I feel like this is the part where most people, where they just look at the business owners and they're like, oh, they're so lucky, they own this, they own that, but they don't really see the risks that the business owner takes. And sometimes when there's like a natural disaster or like riots going on, the business owner takes a risk. Could you explain how like Sandy affected your business? Or some of the riots?
Sandy destroyed the business. I mean, we had 6 feet of standing water at the dialysis center because the previous location was below street level. So the entire treatment floor, up to literally the clocks that were hanging on the wall, was flooded. So, but prior to the storm, knowing that it was coming, we removed a lot of the very expensive equipment from that area, and we brought it to higher ground so that we were able to save it. And then I believe the storm hit, it was Monday night. And within that night and Tuesday, I had organized to use another dialysis center's location that was just about to go under construction. So, and they had no patients there. So I was able to negotiate an agreement with the administrator of that unit to basically come in. We organized a whole bunch of people to come in and clean and set up and bring whatever supplies we could get or that we were able to save, and bring it to that location, somehow get a hold of the patients. And by the next day, I want to say by Wednesday, I believe it was Wednesday, we were already dialyzing all our patients at the other location, which was significantly smaller. So we were working pretty much 24/7. And we did that for 29 days, because if we would have done it for 30 days, we would have had to officially with the Department of Health change the address, and we didn't want to do that. So within 29 days, we rebuilt the dialysis center, we dialyzed all our patients, and we moved back in.
I think a lot of physical work. Can you talk a little bit more about like the mental aspect of it, where it's like the mental challenges of you being at home, knowing that you can't do anything about it and that it's affecting your business? How do you react with it? And what advice would you give to business owners when something happens outside of their hands?
Well, the Sandy situation was unique because at the same time that our business was underwater, our home was underwater, the apartment where we were living wasn't functioning. We had no lights there as well. So that was like one of those situations where multitasking came into big play. But obviously, we found a place to sleep, we found a place to shower, and the business became the priority because that needed to get back up and running as quickly as possible. So that was a huge challenge. And, at that point, you're just purely, I think, functioning on adrenaline. You're really not thinking things through. It's, I guess, like running a marathon. It's kind of like you just know you have to start and you have to finish. And no matter how difficult it gets throughout that journey, you have to get to the end. There's no other options. And we did.
You do get, as a person that has run the New York City Marathon, I know that when you get to the end, that's like the most emotional part. So like it's like all the hard work and all the blood, sweat, and tears that you're putting in, you're like, finally, like it's finally everything is adding up and it's going the way that it needs to go. So that's like kind of an interesting analogy that you were talking about. You mentioned about how you had to switch dialysis centers from your location to a smaller location and how that affected business. Currently, you moved from that smaller location that at the time was the bigger location to a much bigger facility. How has that affected your business?
Sorry.
Yeah.
How has that affected our business? It's kind of like one of those, it was wonderful to move to this new location. Sometimes I honestly don't even remember what the old place was like because it was old. It needed, repairs. It needed update. And this place is definitely a lot more enjoyable and pleasant to be in. It's bright, it's sunny, it's new, it's clean. You should come visit once and get a tour. And that aspect is wonderful. But obviously the challenges of having a place that's 21,000 square foot just of treatment area, and then an additional garage and additional area below the building that's another 21,000 square feet. It's definitely challenging in the sense the cost of the property, the cost of the rent, the cost of water, the cost of electricity. Everything is not just double or triple. It's in some cases 10 times more. So, but the number of patients don't grow that quickly. So your revenue is not increasing nearly as quick as the costs, which are immediate when you relocate. So financially, it's been a huge struggle to be able to afford this new building. And we were actually doing quite well initially. We moved in December of 2018. And 2019, we were growing nicely. And even in early 2020, we had already hit about 250 patients. And then COVID happened. So, and unfortunately, we did lose quite a few patients to COVID. We lost some patients to death. We lost some patients that transferred to do like home programs so that they didn't have to commute to dialysis. And then a lot of patients actually moved from New York to other states or even countries. So, so we did lose quite a few patients, and we're now working really hard to try to rebuild our census just to get back to those numbers that were pre-COVID. And we're, truth be told, really not anywhere near that. We're still about 20% below where we were right before COVID. So,
kind of interesting because some businesses were able to move online. Dialysis is one of those businesses which you can't really do it online. And it's kind of interesting about how you were talking about how COVID hit. I mean, not COVID, how Sandy hit. And literally the next day you had to be open and functioning and helping your clients because it's life or death for some cases. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's very interesting. They always, like, it's always mentioned about how you never should chase the money, you should chase the passion or something else in it. I see that, like, the way that I see it is that you're out there, you're helping a lot of people and having an impact on other people's lives. What would you say is like the relationship that you build with the patients or helping the patients? Like, how would you explain that feeling?
I'll be very honest with you. I've been in dialysis now for almost 20 years. And initially, the first patients that came through our doors, I got to know very closely. I got to know their children, their spouses, their families, and the patients. But unfortunately, a dialysis patient's life expectancy is roughly about 3 to 5 years at best. I mean, yes, there are some patients that have been on dialysis for 15, 20 years or more, but that's usually quite rare. Being that this disease is exactly what it stands for, end stage renal dialysis, it's usually an end stage. It's a consequence of many other medical conditions and problems and issues that the patient has. So I honestly, after a few years of that grief and dealing with that situation, I kind of separated myself for the most part from direct patient relationships. There are still some patients that I know that will come to me because they're like a friend of the families or, somehow know me, that I am a little closer to, but I really do try to keep a professional distance and create some boundary to have that separation, because I'm not a direct patient care person. I'm not a clinical person. I'm an administrator. So I just found for my own health and well-being and mental stability that I keep that separate.
It's very interesting about how you're able to separate the business and professional aspect of it. It sounds like you're doing a lot of very interesting things, helping a lot of people. But what is like one thing that you're most proud of? Obviously, your kids don't count because that's what everybody would say.
Of
What's
course,
the second?
my family,
What's the
my
third?
family, my friends. I'll be honest with you. I look at other people in terms of their families and their friends, and they just, truth be told, are just not as lucky as some of us. So, to have a group of friends like we have that will drop everything to be there for you, or just even to listen to you rant about something stupid that's bothering you that day, is priceless. To have a family that you love and that loves you back and respects you is it's not common. Not everyone has it. So even though you'd like for me to exclude it, I'm not going to, because that's probably one of my biggest accomplishments and something that I'm most proud of. I mean, obviously developing this business, creating this team is something I'm very proud of. But, like in my heart, the thing that really warms my heart late at night would be my family and my friends.
I think that's kind of interesting that you didn't mention your dog, but that's okay.
My dog is my family. Now we have a new addition because Ella adopted a dog too. So it's a rescue that was in a kill shelter that she basically saved, and it's the most wonderful dog, and she's very sweet. It's like a German Shepherd mixed with something, we're not sure what. But
pretty cool.
Yeah.
You came a very long way.
No one should ever take for granted their family or their friends, because that's not so easy to come by, and not everyone's lucky enough to have that.
And also the relationship that you have with your real friends versus people that you have at work, or just like people that are so-called friends, where that honest constructive criticism comes in play, where you could start a project and they're like, okay, so this sucks, you need to fix this. I think that's very important, because a lot of people there, like that are out there, are like, okay, so he's my friend, so I have to be super nice to him. But I think that constructive criticism is the most important trait of a friend, because if you can't be honest with somebody, then that person is not necessarily a good friend. Like, you can't be a good friend to somebody.
Well, I'll be honest with you. My true test of a friendship is not necessarily at good times. The true test is not even necessarily at bad times, but when you have a confrontation, like you have a legitimate disagreement. Maybe that friend did something to really piss you off and you told them off. Like, I remember, I've been friends with Ala since first grade. We've known each other for over 40 years. And we've had like full-blown fights, like where we've cursed each other out. I remember even one time we were flying back from Denver and we literally got seats sitting separately. So, because we just didn't want to speak to each other anymore. Like, I don't even remember what the fight was about, but it was definitely serious. And then a few days went by and we called each other and we were like, okay, so are we over that now? Yeah, we're over that. Okay. So what's up? What's going on? What'd you do yesterday? And like, that to me is like the true sign of, a friendship. Like, that already becomes like a family person, like somebody, a part of you. So, because you could go out and have drinks and go to restaurants and do all that and hang out at each other's house and told Angie. But it's when, pardon my language, the shit hits the fan that you really know if this person is your friend. And you should be able to argue and have a disagreement with your friend and then know that your relationship is strong enough that you can get past that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that want ephemeral happiness where they go out, they go to the bars, clubs, but that's not a true sign of a friendship. I think you need somebody that's not only there for the good, the bad, the dirty, and the constructive criticism. Yeah. It sounds like you came a very long way from those early Colorado days. We're not going to talk about the Odessa days because you said you don't remember much from there. What have you accomplished since, like, in your whole life that you would have never thought you would have done?
Well, I never would have thought that I'd be running a dialysis center. First of all, it's not something that I ever even really thought about. And, every day, like, I wake up and I'm appreciative of what I've accomplished and what I have on a personal and professional level. So, just in general, who I am and where I am today, I'm very grateful for. I don't take it for granted.
That's very interesting. Also, I wanted to ask, do you think that, who do you think impacted your business in the strongest way? You mentioned how your dad had like some instilled some values into you and followed at a young age. Who do you think you modeled like your whole like business hustle and this whole mind for?
I think it's not one of those like, nurture versus nature type of things. It's just the whole feel. Like, coming here as an immigrant, I remember even at the age of 10, 11, 12, my weekends, I didn't have to hang out with my kids. I would help my parents in their businesses and whatever they were doing just to survive and make a few dollars so that we could survive. So all of those sacrifices, I learned a lot from my dad in terms of business and making a buck, so to speak. And honestly, to be honest with you, not like making a buck and scamming somebody, but like legitimately maybe buying something cheap, reselling it, knowing the value of things. One of the biggest things I learned from my mom was always, she would sit in a room and she never said much, but she would listen to everything that everyone said. And she would retain that information in her mind. And then in very unexpected ways, she would use that information. She would either use that knowledge or that information. And I think I learned that also from my mom, to kind of just sit, listen, and observe, and then make my own thing in my head, and then use that information to benefit me. So, I think my parents were crucial. My husband too. Egid was instrumental in even initially negotiating how the partnership was going to be for this dialysis center and those things. He played a very important role in that as well. But it's a lot of people in my life that helped to make me the kind of person I am, the personality that I have.
You mentioned that you pitched your idea to the doctor and he kind of like agreed to be business partners. What do you think he would be doing right now if he was like, that idea kind of sucks, I'm not in that?
He's still a doctor. He'd be a doctor.
No, what would you be doing? What would you be doing?
What would I be doing? I probably would have reverted back and gone to law school, because that was ultimately what my plan was. I didn't have any other plan. So if for whatever reason this wasn't a successful venture and the dialysis center never opened or it didn't take off, I would have gone back to law school.
Pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. You kind of answered this question, but can you elaborate a little bit more? For our audience, we like to show that life has peaks and valleys. And as we heard from this whole podcast for now, we heard about the ups, the downs. Could you talk about a challenging point in your life and how you were able to climb back out of it?
There's all kinds of challenges. Hurricane Sandy, COVID, the death of my parents, a lot of things. You're challenged every single day, and it's how you deal with it, how you come out of it, that helps to shape who you are. I think the peaks and valleys are constant. It's not like one peak or in one valley. It's like a constant roller coaster of up and down, up and down. And that roller coaster could happen even throughout the day. It doesn't even have to be over the course of a life. You could wake up happy and then have your day ruined by someone. You could wake up not feeling well and then something great happens and, your day changes. So like I said, it's important to take that information, learn from it, and grow from it. And I would probably say your mistakes are your best friends, because that's really what's going to teach you the most. That's what you're going to remember. That's what's going to stick in your head. When something comes easy and just happens 1, 2, 3, you don't learn from it. And you sometimes don't even know how to replicate it. But it's when you really fall down a couple of times and fall down hard that you learn to pick yourself up and that you just become a better and stronger person and you move on.
Very interesting. For the final question of the podcast, I know we went a little bit over. I wanted to ask you, you spoke about how mistakes shape you and ultimately help you. Can you talk about a specific mistake that you remember right now that you're like, okay, thank God I made that because it made me so much better?
Well, you could look at the fact that I didn't go to law school because that was where I was heading as a mistake. One might think that that's a huge disappointment. Your child is on track to go to law school and to be an attorney, and she's not. But I don't think that my parents would be disappointed with what I've accomplished, even though I'm not an attorney. So, so I guess it's all perspective, how you're going to look at it. You could sit and be upset with yourself and think your life is a failure because you're not an attorney and that's what you always wanted to be. Or you could say, okay, I'm not an attorney, fine, but I'm pretty damn proud of what I've accomplished and where I am today.
Thank you so much. I think that we learned a lot.
And I'm going to give one piece of advice. Your parents are wonderful people. You need to love them and respect them and appreciate them always. And don't take them for granted because all their sacrifices, their sleepless nights were all for you. So not necessarily for them. So just remember that. One day you'll be a parent and you'll probably understand more.
Soon, but hopefully not too soon.
No.
Yeah, thank you so much, Clara.